Today on the Berean window, we're going to be in Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Paul, the Apostle Paul, St. Paul, whatever you like. He's writing this under Roman guard. He is a prisoner. He doesn't know how it's going to end for him, and it could go very badly. And right in the middle of that, he says something kind of strange. Before we get into reading the passage, I want to just take a few minutes and think about the situation that Paul is in, the situation that Christianity as a whole is in. This is around AD 62. Christianity is not a respected religion. It's small, it's underground, illegal in many places, being actively persecuted, and one of its most visible leaders. This isn't a random Christian. This is Paul. He's the guy who's been traveling, planning churches, holding this whole fragile, scattered movement together. And he's writing to the church in Philippi. That's a church he personally founded years earlier. There are people there that he knows. He's been in their homes, he knows their faces, they know him. So if we put ourselves in that position, if you were in Philippi and you got a letter from Paul, what would you expect to hear? If it's me, I'd almost expect a letter that sounds scared or defensive or at least cautious. Something like, keep your heads down, don't draw attention, be careful. Things are getting dangerous. I don't know what's going to happen to me. This could be my last letter to you. You might expect something that sounds like a goodbye or farewell. But that isn't what this letter is. Let's read Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. I'm reading this from the Berean Study Bible. Now I want you to know, brothers, that my circumstances have actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And most of the brothers, confident in the Lord by my chains, now dare more greatly to speak the word without fear. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former, however, preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can add to the distress of my chains. What then is the issue? Just this, that in every way, whether by false motives or true, Christ is preached. And in this I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. This is not how a normal person talks when their life is on the line. Paul starts telling the Philippians that his imprisonment hasn't slowed things down at all. In fact, he says it's actually done the opposite. The gospel is spreading. People in the imperial guard know why he's there. Other believers are getting bolder. And then he says something else that's kind of surprising. He says that some people are preaching Christ for good reasons, and some people are preaching Christ for really bad reasons. Some out of love, some out of rivalry. Some sincerely, some out of selfish ambition. Some of them, he says, are actually doing it to cause him trouble while he's in prison. So not everyone out there preaching Christ has clean motives. These people see Paul in prison and think, well, now is my chance. Maybe they want his influence. They want his audience to look more important. Maybe they're trying to stir things up or even make his situation worse. Paul doesn't deny that. He doesn't pretend everyone in the Christian movement is pure or sincere or well-intentioned. He says something I didn't expect. Basically, he says, I don't care. What does it matter? Whether they're doing it from false motives or true ones, Christ is being preached, and in that I rejoice. We see that a lot today. We're very used to seeing people sorted out into good Christians or bad Christians. There's a lot of time spent talking about who's sincere, who's fake, who's doing it for attention, who's compromised, celebrity Christians, people in it for the money, for ego. But Paul doesn't play that game here. He's not saying motives don't matter. He's saying that the truth itself doesn't change depending on who's talking about it. This is where I ran into a really interesting comment from one of the early Christian writers named Tertullian. I was reading some commentary on this passage and his take stood out to me. Before I read what he says, if you're like me, you might be thinking, okay, who's Tertullian and why should I care what he thinks? So I'm just going to give you a quick high level background. Tertullian lived around the late 2nd, early 3rd century in Carthage. He's often called the father of Latin Christianity, not because he invented it, but he was one of the first really major Christian thinkers to write extensively in Latin instead of Greek. He was incredibly well educated, sharp, witty, very direct. He's also credited with coining some really important theological terms, including language that eventually led to how Christians talk about the Trinity. The church never formally made him a saint, but nobody really disputes how massive his influence was on Western Christian thinking. So he's not scripture, he's not an apostle, but he's very early, very close to the source, and he's thinking carefully about these same passages. Here is what Tertullian had to say about this first section of Paul's letter. What is skewed among those who proclaim Christ out of partisanship is their temperament and their motive, not the content of their proclamation. Paul exposes these bad tempers as the sole cause of their disunity. But these bad tempers apparently do not have a bad effect on the mysteries of the faith. There is still only one Christ and one God. This does not change regardless of what motives may come into play in preaching him. So Paul is able to say that it is nothing to me whether Christ be preached on a pretext or in truth. Christ is proclaimed. What really matters is the one who is preached, whether through pretentiousness or in true faith. When Christ is preached in truth, he is being preached faithfully. The rule of truth remains what it is, regardless of who preaches it. Better or worse, there is but one truth. Meanwhile, the conduct of preachers varies. Some preach truly, single-mindedly. Others preach insincerely with affectations. So basically, the problem isn't Christ is being preached. The problem is the hearts of the people doing the preaching. But the truth itself doesn't change. There's still one Christ, one gospel, one God. And that's exactly Paul's point. It means the truth doesn't belong to the people who represent it well, and it doesn't stop being true when people represent it badly. Paul is in chains. Other people are jockeying for position. Some of them are probably being selfish. Some of them are probably being ugly about it. And Paul's response is, if Christ is being preached, I can live with that. I want to end today with a single word. It's a Hebrew word, Shema. Most of the time in our Bibles, it gets translated as hear or listen. But in Hebrew, it's a little thicker than that. It's not just about taking in information. Shema is the kind of listening that implies response. It's hearing something in a way that actually claims you, that stays with you, and that asks something of you. It's the difference between noticing noise and actually receiving words. So when scripture talks about hearing God, it's often not talking about awareness. It's talking about a posture, a willingness to be addressed, a willingness to be moved. It reminds me that a lot of the time, the issue isn't that I don't know what the text says. The issue is whether I'm actually open to being shaped by it. And that's Shema. That's where we'll stop today. Next time, we'll keep moving forward. Chapter 1, verse 19 in Philippians. If you've been finding these helpful, you can subscribe to the channel to catch the next one. Either way, thank you for taking the time to watch the video and read and think through this with me.